Night shifters, what's your scariest story? I work nights as a zookeeper. Sometimes we have to check on the gorillas and their indoor holding. You walk down a dark hallway maybe 6 feet from their enclosure. All you have is a flashlight and it's sometime after midnight. Your goal is to check on each gorilla to make sure they are okay. The gorilla's goal is to scare the ever-loving crap out of you. It's a game for them to get you to scream. They love hiding behind walls, sneaking up on you, and then bellowing as loud as they can right next to you. It's a fun game for them. Haunted houses have nothing on gorilla jump scares. Working in a restaurant at 2:30 a.m., some dude shows up and is just watching us through the front window. Seems drunk at first, ignored him for a few minutes, turned back around, and he has a huge effing rock in his hands and lifts it above his head and slams it against the window, shattering the outside layer. He then looks directly at us and says, "I'm gonna kill all of you." We dialed the police immediately and armed ourselves with kitchen knives. He wandered back to his car and sped off. The cops got there maybe 8 minutes later, it seemed like 30 at the time, and couldn't find the guy. We were robbed at gunpoint a few nights later. I just walked out and never went back. Yeah, no, 2 instances like that within a week, not sure you could pay me enough to stay at a job like that. This is my story. I was an emergency dispatcher for the police department in my city working overnights when a woman called in to say her depressed husband had gone missing. She said he sometimes likes to go to a local 1800s-era cemetery and just be alone. We sent 2 officers out to look for him and they saw the door to the mausoleum cracked open. When they went in, they made their way through the very dark underground rooms and finally one of their flashlights caught the image of a figure. They thought it was just the man standing there, but it turned out that he had hanged himself from one of the pipes overhead and was dead. The ceiling was so low to the ground that his feet were still on the floor. The officers hightailed it out and called back to say they had found him. This was late October in Maine. Very spooky. I worked for a taxi company doing quiet night shifts. One time, a customer phoned in to say her hire was late, and I had to tell her that I didn't have any bookings at her address for then. She swore me out and cut off the call. 10 minutes later, she phoned back to say she found out where my office was and was coming down with her boyfriend and her brother. This was about 2:30. At 3:10, a car pulled up in front of the office and 2 men got out and tried to force their way into the office building. I phoned the police, but the people left before the police got there. That was pretty scary. Used to work at an ice cream factory from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Second day on the job, this tenured line leader was trying to unclog compacted cookie dough from the machine using her effing finger. It chopped off the end when it unclogged and started again because no one stopped it. I'm still fresh and new as in helping her out and learning. She jumped off the ladder and yells, "It cut my goddamn finger off!" I froze in fear. She pushed me aside, grabbed all the paper towels, and booked it to the ER. We found her fingertip in the ice cream catch a few minutes later and had to trash the entire batch and start fresh. Just before my days off, and I had to come back in the next day short-handed. Obligatory edit, yes, we found the bit of her finger, cleaned it, and put it on ice. Took it to the ER, she got it reattached, and I get it, short-handed. I scream, you scream, we all scream for, "Oh God, my finger!" I used to work third shift security in a neighborhood near a university. We often encountered some weird stuff, but mostly we just dealt with drunk college bros and the like. One night, it's near 4 a.m., so we're ending our shift and heading in when this old homeless-looking man stops me and asks me to call an ambulance for him. I ask what's wrong, and he's telling me he's having heart palpitations and self-termination ideation. I flag down a coworker who informs our boss and calls for the ambulance. I sit down next to the guy and he's lying on the sidewalk and let him talk to me. At first he's saying what you expect from someone who wants to commit self-termination. Then it gets dark as hell. He starts telling me about a woman he stabbed because he asked her for $20, but she only gave him a few bucks, so he murdered her. Okay, pretty creepy, but then it gets worse. He just starts going on about how he's AR'd people and committed arson and other horrifying stuff, and I'm sitting almost alone with him while my coworker is several buildings down on the phone with dispatch. He starts telling me about how his mother used to have intercourse with her father and brother and that he saw that, and about how he's a crackhead. When the ambulance arrived, he started cussing and yelling, but at least I was free to go at that point. I understand that it was probably at least partially the ramblings of a mentally ill crackhead, but it was still unnerving. It's not every day a stranger confesses to you about murder and R's he's committed. Also, I'm a young woman, so I would occasionally get the super effing creepy guys who would try to corner me on dark roads or follow me around, so that would get pretty terrifying. There are certain times where I would say you are not required to be a good Samaritan. When a guy starts telling you about how he's a murderer and Rist, you run and leave him to fate. I used to be a bouncer at several different locations in the downtown Toronto area. I enjoyed working on the patio when I could despite not being a smoker because talking to people made the time go by faster and hey, easier to get phone numbers. There was this one place I worked at that always had crazy crap happen. The patio was also a weak chain link fence with some tarp thrown over it. The club was cheap, so the fence didn't cover the entire area, so I had to be watchful of people trying to sneak in. One night I felt lazy, so I stood in the opening with my back to the street. I was talking to some guy trying to kill time. I felt some guy stand behind me coming in from the street. This wasn't too unusual. Some people get turned away and when they see me, try to bribe their way through the patio entrance. I was having none of it, so I puffed myself up, determined to ignore him, and he gave up on me noticing him. After about 10 minutes of this, I started getting a bit creeped out, because the guy was just standing behind me without saying or doing anything. I turned around to tell him to F off, but stopped mid-sentence. The guy was a bit taller than me. I'm 6'2", kinda lanky, very well dressed. He was also covered from head to toe in blood, like completely drenched. I thought he'd been in an accident, so I dropped my tough guy act and started asking him if he was okay, needed an ambulance, etc. He calmly responded, "Nah, he's good. He just wants to find his brothers." I was like, are you sure your brothers are here? He insists that they are here, as they told him they'd be in X city, not anywhere near Toronto, where the club is located. After his complete obliviousness to what city he's in, the fact that he's soaked in blood, and his intense stare, dude wasn't blinking, I called my boss up. When my boss appeared, I gave a quick rundown of what happened. He talked to the guy very briefly, then told him he'd assist. He went and got some patrolling cops. When the cops appeared, one of them lightly touched the bloody guy on the shoulder. That's when he started screaming incoherently and tried slashing at him with a small knife that had been concealed in his pocket. The cop, my boss, and I subdued the guy until he could be cuffed and placed inside a cop car. The guy was screaming loudly and struggling to hulk out of the cuffs as the cuffs cupped deeply into his wrists the entire time. To this day, I still have no clue what the hell that was about. I worked for 4 years as a chef in a nursing home. I typically left by 8 every night, but I would occasionally stay over and help the third shift janitors clean and lock up the kitchen. I was leaving one night close to 11 or midnight-ish when the front desk lady asked me to run into the tunnel and grab a few items from the locked housing unit. My building was split into 2 side-by-side buildings connected by a tunnel underground that we would transport bodies of the deceased so other residents didn't see them. This prevented panic attacks for our elderly patients. The tunnel had a few storage units down there, so it wasn't uncommon to need to get stuck. To get into my end of the tunnel, you had to use a locked stairwell or elevator with a passcode. So I get to the tunnel, and for some reason, all of the lights are out except the red glowing emergency exit signs. Alright, no biggie. I turn the corner from the elevator to head up the tunnel and retrieve the item Margie needed when I see a tall black figure just swaying side to side. I approach it just in time for it to shriek at the top of its lungs, effectively prompting everything in my bowels to make a sudden vacation in my pants. She was illuminated only by the red exit signs in a dingy cement tunnel. She screamed, I screamed, she screamed louder, Ronnie, the poor janitor from further in the tunnel, screamed, and repeat. She turned out not to be a demon spawn ready to reap my soul, but a memory patient that woke up in the night and wandered off in a daze. How she ended up in the tunnel I never figured out, but after calming her down, I was able to walk her back to her room and get her settled. The effing attending nurse didn't even know she was missing, and I don't know how long she was down there. I was careful about that tunnel for a long time after that, though. I'm a really skeptical guy, but I'm also irrationally afraid of dark tunnels like that. The screams I would have made and running I would have done, that poor woman would have been down there a while before someone else went and got her. I used to work for a sub shop as a delivery driver. The weirdest thing was the Montana Cowboy. I'm located in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, so we have a diverse crowd of homeless. One night around 1 a.m., a cowboy-looking dude walks into the shop. He seems just off on something. I can't form any sentences whatsoever. All I could get out of him was his name, Ben. Ben seemed like he was very drunk, smelled like it too, and had something else in his system. He kept kind of saying the same gurgled mess over and over. No idea what he was saying. Me and the manager I was working with are pretty chill guys, so we offered him some soup and a sandwich for free. He was so happy and thankful, I think. While he's eating, I went out on a delivery and stopped the car at an apartment. As I'm walking up, a cowboy walks out. Not the same cowboy, but a different one. I said hello or whatever, but he responded with the gurgled mess the guy in the shop said to me. Like the same cadence and tone, everything, even kinda looked like him. I thought that was weird, so I got back to the shop and the cowboy is still there. He's eating and saying nonsense. My manager found out he was from Montana. So I go on another delivery, walk to the apartment building, but wait for a effing second. There's a mother effer with a mother effing cowboy hat sitting on the stoop and asks me for $1. I told him all the cash I have is for my work. He said a gurgled mess like the last two guys and I left. Now here's a effing kicker. I go back to the shop and Ben is gone. So I go on my last delivery around 3 a.m. and pull up to a house. It's lit up inside and I can see people are moving around with the shadows on the window. I knock on the door and who answers? Effing Ben! And who's in the effing house with him? The other two effing cowboys. Ben says, "Sup," hands me a $100 bill and slams the door. I was dumbfounded. Alright folks, either we've got a new kind of bizarre cryptid or some really strange pranksters in Milwaukee. Having spent time in Milwaukee, I'm ready to believe either is a solid possibility. I was a young teenager. I had a commercial cleaning gig with my parents as the night shift guys. You know, the ones who come into your friendly neighborhood Chili's after the other guys close and really clean the place, kitchen, bathrooms, and all. The restaurant was located in a fairly busy area of town in a mini strip mall, so we weren't really concerned about security since there was always a patrolling night guard riding around the strip's parking lot to make sure there was no trouble. Well, this particular night, it was just myself and my mother cleaning one of our nightly buildings by ourselves while my pop and sister were doing the other one across town. Everything was going smoothly until my mom realized she left our new box of Tide, we used it for the kitchen floors, outside in the truck. Me, being unfazed by the aspect of being alone outside at 1 a.m. in the morning, chose to go get it, and right when I was locking the door to the truck and inching my way back inside, I noticed a guy standing across the parking lot just staring at me. He wasn't moving or anything like that, just staring. It was creepy as hell, so I merely walked back inside and made sure that the door was locked before continuing to do my business. When I moved out of the kitchen into the front dining area to begin mopping, that's when I noticed that creeper dude was now standing beneath the front door awning outside, staring in the glass, looking at me. The dude practically screamed homeless with his disheveled clothes, long stringy hair, and thick wild beard, but honestly, it was his eyes that really freaked me out. I can only describe them as utterly soulless. Beginning to get a bit freaked out, but not wanting to be rude, I gave him a quick glance before going back to my work. But before I could really do it, he started slowly and almost rhythmically pounding on the glass with his fists, still staring intently at me. At this point, I was pretty much done with trying to be patient with him and promptly yelled at him to pee off. My mom heard me yelling from the kitchen and came out to see just what all the commotion was, and I told her while pointing at the man. The moment that I did, though, I saw my mom blanch and then slowly begin to back away. She grabbed my wrist and urged me to do the same, but wouldn't let me turn around to see what the hell was up. We reached the back stockroom of the restaurant and stayed there while my mom called the strip security guard to let him know what was up. Later that evening, after the security guard came and checked the place, he said there was no sign of the guy, but there, at the front door of the restaurant, he found a discarded straight razor lying in the middle of the pavement, and another in the bushes at the place that he had been pounding on the glass. My mom said that when I had called her over and looked away, he had grinned at her and I both and held up the knife to tap it against the glass. We no longer work nights, but still, whenever we do get the occasional call for a deep clean, I always have my own weapons with me just in case. Holy crap, F that completely. I have worked nights plenty in my life, and that would get me to quit. Probably not what you're hoping for, but whatever. I worked overnight at a pasta plant during my teens. One night my dad showed up out of nowhere. He worked there, he was the quality control manager, and told me we were going home. No explanation or anything at the time. He just said they were shutting down production immediately and there wasn't going to be work for probably a few more days. Turned out some guy effing killed one of his kids in the plant, probably by accident. It took a long time for the rumors to get back to me, but apparently one of the forklift guys was joyriding around the place, went under one of the overhangs, but had his kid in the thing with him. And that kid was standing up with his head out the top. Apparently, either he was decapitated or his neck was broken, but either way, he was killed. It was creepy how it happened in the place, and it couldn't have been far from me, but I had no idea. Also, really terrible and horrific just thinking about how it could have happened. As a parent now, it makes me sick. I work at an industrial copper mine in British Columbia, Canada. The mine water gets filtered through a tailings process in ponds spread out through the woods. We work from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., and with travel to and from work included, the workday is about 15 hours long. A typical work tour is 5 nights long, and by the end of it, you're pretty tired. Driving through the forest at night, you have to get out of your truck when you get to a pump house. On several occasions, I can hear the screaming of animals, various birds, coyotes, wildcats, bears, etc., and never really understand the origin of the sound. You can shine a flashlight at the woods, but it's not uncommon to find blinking reflective eyes, so it's almost better not to. You just end up creeping yourself out. One night I was at one of the pump houses in the dark, and I hear bushes rustling just feet from me around the corner of the pump house door I just locked. I froze in place out of fear and uncertainty as to whether I should unlock the pump house or run back to my truck. The rustling got louder, and for some foolish reason I shined my flashlight at the noise and walked towards it. I saw the branches of the bush explode forward as a giant brown monster popped out. It took a second to realize it was a moose. If you have ever seen a moose in person, you know they are huge. It just effed off in another direction, but scared the crap out of me in the process. This happened a few months ago. I work at a grocery store overnights, and everyone else who should have been there called out for one reason or another. I went around 2 a.m. to smoke, and I saw someone sitting on the bench. I didn't really think anything of it. I figured it was just a drunk who was wandering around the town since there's a few bars down the street. I sat down and started to smoke and look at my phone. The drunk guy screamed at me as I lit a smoke. "Hey buddy, do you mind? My dog doesn't like smoke." I looked around confused as F and didn't see a dog anywhere. "I think your dog might have ran off somewhere, man. I don't see a dog." He stood up and opened up his jacket, and he had a little pug in his jacket. I noticed he had a large kitchen knife sitting stuffed into his inside jacket pocket. He started to pet his dog and baby talk the dog with very slurred words. I put out my smoke and decided I'm not going to die for smoking next to a dog. He started singing "Just Give Me a Reason" by Pink and walking towards me as I was heading back in. Hurried the F back inside of the building. I know I should be on your side, but the guy had a dog in his pocket. By dog lover's law, that guy was right to go for you. Sorry. I actually have a decent one for this. Not scary, but definitely odd. I was working in a residential neighborhood one night around 2 a.m., minding my own business, doing an inspection, when I hear someone walking up the alleyway behind me. Now, I'm all around the city for this job, so coming across people at odd hours is quite common. What isn't common, however, is for the person you come across to be wearing coveralls and a balaclava. So here I am, locked eyes with this guy, preparing for whatever is about to happen. He covers about half the distance between us and then stops dead in his tracks right beside a sedan. The dude then proceeds to whip the hubcaps off his car faster than I've seen anyone do anything in my life. Give me a nod, turn around, and walk away. I've never been so dumbfounded in my life. I had a third shift IT job at a casino and I was playing World of Warcraft, wasn't supposed to be, when the phone rang. It said surveillance. Those guys never called. I answered the phone and the surveillance guy's like, "Are you playing World of Warcraft?" Stone cold busted. I scrambled to quickly figure out how he could see as I thought my monitor was hidden from camera view. I checked the few times I was in the surveillance room. I decided to play it straight. "LOL, yeah," I say. Then he's all like, "Oh my god, I play a druid." Then he goes on and on about it, LOL. That was scary as F. I agree, WoW players are scary. I did my basic military training at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. Our barracks were old, dating to around the 1950s or 1960s. Every night, a number of recruits were assigned fire guard duty, which was essentially trying to stay awake for an hour and mopping the floor or buffing it until the next soldier came on duty. The fire guard post for my platoon was at one end of a long hallway, directly under a set of speakers suspended from the ceiling. Whenever the drill sergeants made an announcement, you'd hear them through the speakers. This is how they communicated reveille, wake up, and other instructions where they had to talk to the whole building at once. Usually these were communicated in blistering shouts, rendered staticky and nearly unintelligible as they blared through the ancient sound system. One night, about halfway through basics, so sleep deprivation really hit hard by this point, I was sitting in a chair under the speakers trying to stay awake. The speakers crackled to life and I immediately perked up. Unusual for an announcement this time of night, but it wasn't outside the realm of possibility. The voice was soft, barely above a whisper. A woman's voice. "Private, get everyone outside right now." The comm line remained open, a low hum hissing through. The voice again. "Right now, Private, everyone outside." Weird. Not that it was a woman's voice, it was a co-ed basic training and we had a couple of female drills, but for it to come across so softly was very strange. When the brown rounds used the intercom, it was at full shouting voice. I headed down the length of the hall to where the second platoon had a fire guard on duty similarly situated. I asked him if he heard anything, got a negative response. I made a decision. I'd chalk it up to my imagination and tiredness and not risk having the entire barracks furious at me for disturbing their sleep in error. If it was one of the drill sergeants messing with me and I got in trouble for not waking everyone up, at least I'd be the only one getting smoked. Nothing happened the rest of the night, and I put it out of my mind until the very end of basic when we had our 3-day field training exercise. We made it through and the drill started treating us like real humans almost again. As we completed the last day of the exercise, which was a near live fire night march to attack scenario, we all gathered around the fire. The drills got to talking, then to telling stories, then got to telling ghost stories about the base. My drill, Pareda, a male, told the story of the first female drill sergeant on Fort Leonard Wood. I can't remember when it was, the 70s, 80s, but it was decades ago. Apparently, she faced a lot of pressure and harassment, as you can imagine. It was unrelenting and harsh, and apparently she couldn't take it. She'd hung herself from some exposed water pipes using her belt. A few years later, they'd plastered over the exposed pipes so they could mount speakers there. I was working the overnight shift at a small-town gas station, and walking out of the bathroom, I saw a guy looking in through the window. I informed him that the door was unlocked. He came in, asked for some alcohol, then went to the bathroom. When he returned, he asked me if I liked making money. I knew this was going to a place I didn't want it to go, but nonetheless answered in the affirmative. He proceeded to basically offer me a role in a car smuggling ring and makes me give him a fake phone number. The entire conversation was tense. This dude wasn't effing around. He also asked for directions to a town about 30 minutes away, and I super cheerfully and clearly told him as I wanted nothing more than for him to be there and not here. About an hour later, the same car pulls into the lot and parks sideways by the door. At this point, I am internally freaking the F out. Oh my god, he called the number, found out I was BSing him, and now I'm effed. Much to my relief, his much less imposing friend walks in and again asks me for directions to the same town. I actually lead him outside and point out exactly what road he needs to turn down and give him full directions. The entire time, his scary butt friend is completely turned around in the passenger seat, staring me down with a look on his face that I don't ever want to see again. I have been asked only once if I liked making money by someone while working a job at a hotel. I, not wanting trouble down the line, answered, "I really don't, but I doubt you want to hear me rant about capitalism." If you want to get rid of someone, threaten them with rants about capitalism. It isn't a very vivid one, but it is what I have. I work in a sleep lab and I smoke. Before participants come into the lab, I have to set up things as the labs are used for other activities during the day. It's a university. So I'm there making beds, setting up the polysomnograph and whatnot alone. I take a break for a cigarette. It's about 10 p.m., normally fully dark, but it isn't. There's a bit of weird orange glow in the sky, the strange smell in the air. No idea what it is, but work is work. I shrug and go inside. While I'm inside, I hear some weird noise from the outside world. Now, these are sleep labs. They are meant to be soundproofed, but some doors are open and soundproofing isn't perfect. So I send some messages to my friends who know university vibes a bit better than I do. I'm not the 18 to 22 of that sort of scene. I don't hear anything for a while. Then get a message. There have been protests. They are letting off explosives at the university. The police are there but can't engage. I call participants, tell them not to come in. I find out apparently roads are blocked to and from the university, so being a reasonable person, I turn off the lights and close all the doors, get in one of the beds, and go to sleep. Roads out of the university were still lined with protesters when I left in the morning, but after about half an hour of convincing them that I was nice and they should let me leave, out all in one piece. Found out some of the explosives were about 200 meters from my lab. Good times. I work for an organization that typically has hundreds in the building, but at night there's only 11 people. So one night I'm walking through the hallways to go check server temperatures, and I can hear the wind whipping through the building and the fog outside so dense you can't see past the front door. I walk through an office with a motion light and I hear a scream. I ran out of there so fast I go back to my spot and never check the rest of the shift. This was at 2 a.m. When the day shift started to arrive, I walked back into the office to figure out what it was. Turns out it was a Halloween decoration that screamed when you turned the light on. I was the control room supervisor at the nuclear power plant I work at. 1 a.m. on a Saturday, nothing is going on. We are bored out of our minds. Out of nowhere, over 200 alarms come in all at once along with the room lights flickering. I immediately turn and look. Usually flickering lights mean we either had a large pump malfunction or a reactor shutdown, but we usually don't get 200 alarms at the same time. The next 10 seconds felt like 5 minutes as I'm trying to assess the status of the unit. As I turn my head from left to right, I see all my equipment is still functioning despite all sorts of system failures and trip alarms. When my head turns all the way right, I'm looking at the reactor and see it is still critical despite reactor trip alarms being in. My blood pressure immediately shoots up and I see the rest of the crew notice the same thing. Why the hell was the core still online? Everyone was just staring at the full core display and the red control rod out lights were still lit. Reactor scram failures are a huge deal. They are extraordinarily rare. Only one has occurred in the US commercial nuclear industry. We train for them around 40% of the time because they require rapid actions to make the reactor safe. So when you are sitting here questioning why the reactor is still online, it really drives up the anxiety. Is this really happening? And if it is real, you have around 2 minutes to commence taking action to reduce core subcooling to prevent core damage. The reactor control operator starts reaching for the reactor scram switch and turns his head to look at me and says my name. I can see it in his eyes. His heart has to be pounding hard too. He and I have worked together long enough that I already know what he's thinking. He wants to make sure at least one other person agrees with him before he punches out the reactor so that if he's wrong, it's not a unilateral decision. He also is really hoping someone will tell him he's crazy and he needs to sit back down. I finally took a long, deep breath. My first sense the alarms came in. That breath re-energized my brain and got everything thinking correctly. I took a few extra seconds to scan the panels just to be absolutely sure. I was concerned we had to scram the core. We had reactor trip indications that should have shut the reactor down, but it was still online. But between that deep breath and those few extra seconds, I saw it as clear as day on one of my control boards. One of our power lines went down. I look up at the generator information screen and see that the grid voltage just spiked off scale high, then low, and stabilized. I look back down and see some power grid circuit breakers tripped. The rest of the plant was stable. Water level stable, power level stable, coolant flow and pressure stable. Right at that time, the secondary reactor operator starts pointing at the power grid panel too. Everything made sense now. I raise my hand and say, "Update, power line XXXX has dropped. We've had an electrical system perturbation. The unit remains online and stable. Everyone walk down your boards to verify system status and report back when you are complete. Reactor trip criteria was not met. Entering loss of power off normal. End of update." The reactor controls operator turns his head and sees the same thing I did. A power line went down. He nods his head, leans away from the mode switch, takes his own deep breath, presses the alarm silence button, and sits down. Just as fast as it started, I see everyone's anxiety level rapidly drop and we start clearing the alarms. I call up the power grid and they already had someone on their way to us. Apparently a vehicle struck a telephone pole and caused almost a mile of power line to go down pretty much close to the plant. The field it was in was on fire as a result. It was pretty impressive. We've had issues in the past where a power grid perturbation from a lightning strike caused a few spurious alarms, but we've never had that many come in at once. Because the perturbation was that close to the plant, it caused a deeper perturbation, and most of our alarm system basically rebooted. It's a solid-state system, so it can do that, causing all the false alarms. More than anything, I felt our training and teamwork kick in, using diverse indications to validate the condition, getting backup from the team, and taking a few seconds to stay level-headed. Our fundamentals kicked in, and we made the right decision. Even though for about 15 seconds, I almost needed a change of pants. So, I almost went into the Navy for a nuclear field training program, and they told me if I passed, I would be in charge of a nuclear reactor. I told them, "You don't want me in charge of a reactor, I will screw it up." They assured me I wouldn't. Hearing this story, I can now confirm I would have screwed it up. I was working for my friend's dad one night, helping him renovate this old abandoned building that was about to be purchased. It was around 3 a.m. and we were pretty hungry, so he asked if I would stay and finish up this one room while he went and got the food. His treat. I agreed, and what seemed like an hour had passed and I haven't heard from him. I decide to give him a call, so as I'm going to the other room to grab my phone, I hear rustling around and stuff starts to fall over. I yell down the hallway, seeing if it was my friend's dad. I yell once or twice, get no reply. As I'm starting to walk to investigate, I hear this strange cry like an animal is being attacked, and I see the light at the end of the hallway come on, then go off, then the next on, then off. On, then off, getting closer and closer to me. I start to backpedal, not knowing what is going on, and I trip over my own feet. Next thing I know, the light above me turns on, and it's my friend's Great Dane. My friend's dad did get back, turned on the motion sensor lights by mistake, and brought the dog. He didn't answer me due to the fact he had food in his mouth. As the owner of a Great Dane, this sounds very accurate. Also, they can be scary. Sometimes at night, my Great Dane puts her front paws on the end of the bed and raises herself up to her full height. She has mostly black fur, is really thin and bony, and at night, her silhouette looks like a sleep paralysis demon come to take me to hell. It's pretty funny. Doing it overnight at a halfway house where I worked in college. Me and a colleague were in the office just BSing when we see on the security cameras someone walking through the alley. Absconds and people taking off is pretty common, so I thought it was a resident taking off in the middle of the night. I tell her to stay in the office as I go out to the side door that leads to the alley the dude was coming. Well, there's one camera facing down on the way and the other camera is in the opposite direction. When I get outside, no one is there. I radio back to the girl and she's telling me he has to be. She was watching him walk from one camera and didn't see him in the next, so I thought he was under our cameras or something. There's nothing in the alley besides a few telephone poles with buildings on each side. I lit a cigarette and tried listening, but nothing. There's nowhere he could have been. We watched cameras again, and sure as crap, everything is current of what we saw. We did a quick resident check, and everyone was accounted for, so I don't know who this mystery guy was or where the hell he went. Used to work evenings at a movie theater until late in the night. Usually I would get off at 11, but some late night movies wouldn't end till 1 or 2 in the morning, so there were always cars in the parking lot, but a part of it would be open and illuminated by several streetlights, so it'd be easy to see someone standing in that area. One night I got off work and was sitting on the steps to the theater looking off into the empty parking lot waiting for a relative to pick me up. We were texting back and forth and he told me to meet him at a nearby restaurant as it'd be easier to leave its driveway than the movie theater, different traffic. I got up and began walking. Part of the way over to the edge of the parking lot, I hear like some sort of ruffling or scraping noise. It just sounded simply like a shoe scraping along some gravel. I think it's just someone getting out of their car, but I never saw anyone pull up, and I had been out there for some time. I turned around to see if I could help the person getting out. Considering I was still in uniform, I figured it could be someone asking me to tell them the time of a movie ending and how much longer they needed. Spun around, and it's some dude crouched among rows of cars. As soon as I turned around, he started quickly walking toward me, all hunkered down. Never sprinted so fast in my life. I didn't recognize them or know their intentions, so I wasn't taking any chances. Not really scary, but disturbing. I worked night shifts with a serial killer. She is a nurse and had killed 8 people since 2007. She was convicted 2 months after my last shift with her. She got fired for stealing narcotics. Edit to add details. I worked for a private home care company that was outsourced to long-term care homes. I worked with Elizabeth at Telfer Place. She was convicted of assaulting a resident there on one of the shifts I didn't work with her. She had a lot of cooped-up anger towards residents and would pick them based on the aggression or how manageable they were. The lady she assaulted at Telfer was a hitter and screamed bloody murder if you tried to provide any care. She used insulin as a weapon because it's a serial killer if given in large doses, and fairly hard to detect if the resident already has other health problems. She was a really weird lady and pretty useless as a care provider since she wouldn't do any heavy lifting such as rolling a 300-pound bedridden resident over to wash them. I absolutely hate working with her because of that. Most shifts I worked with her, it was just the two of us since it's nights and the residents at Telfer are supposed to be independent. When we worked together, she just followed me around and talked. I really didn't listen to her, which I kind of regret since it would have provided more insight into the person she was. She talked about inbreeding animals quite a bit, which was strange. I wish I had more info on her, but that's my experience working with her. Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.